She said, "You're too old to matter," so I changed the will that Nightai was scraping mashed potatoes off my dinner plate when she said it. Not loud, just tossed it into the air like lint. "You're too old to matter." The fork slipped from my fingers and clinked against the ceramic. No one looked up. Not my son, not the grandchildren, not even the dog. Just me, sitting at the edge of the table I bought, in the house I paid for, serving food I cooked with hands that ache before. Sunrise. I blinked at her voice still floating there, invisible and cutting. Like a wire across the throat, "I'm Evelyn Moore, 73. And that was the moment. I knew I had disappeared. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching. Thanks. It didn't always feel this way. There were years when my name meant something, when someone needed me, wanted me, depended on me. I used to be a mother who mattered. I sewed my son's Halloween costumes, mended every sick day. With soup and cool hands, drove through snow to pick him up from football practice, even when my own nose was bleeding from stress. I worked at the library. Quiet job, quiet life. The kind people don't notice unless something goes wrong. I guess that's what I was. A backup plan that always showed up when Caleb brought Meredith home. She smiled like someone who knew cameras. We're always rolling. I tried. God, I tried. I learned about wine even though it made my tongue dry. I complimented her shoes even when they clicked too loud through my kitchen. I stepped back and made space. That was the beginning of my undoing, I think. The stepping back, little things at first. Letting them host holidays, skipping phone calls so they could focus on their careers. The first time I heard them refer to me as extra help, I laughed. Thought it was a joke. Then I found the documents. It was late. Couldn't sleep. The house had changed. Felt colder. Quieter in the wrong way. I went to the home office to grab an old photo album, but the drawer wasn't locked. There it was. Power of attorney transfer forms. A rewritten will with my name fading off the edge. A note scrawled in Meredith's thin, perfect handwriting. Just remove her from the top. She won't contest. I didn't cry. I sat down and reread every page. My signature had been photocopied and pasted in a crooked slant. I traced it with my finger. I didn't say a word. The silence became a shield. That night, I folded the papers back neatly and slid them under the tray of casserole labels. For 2 weeks, I watched. I noticed how they avoided my eyes when money came up. How they stopped asking if I needed anything. I started waking up earlier. I looked through old bank files. I read every clause in every policy. I dusted off a box from the attic and inside. Was the original will, the one I had filed properly? Naming Caleb as my sole heir when I still believed that meant something. I sat in my room, knees pulled to my chest like a little girl. And I whispered to no one, not anymore. The next morning, I drove to the county office. Alone, I changed the will. That simple? I named the public library as primary. It's a food bank down the street. And a woman named Judith who once changed my tire in the pouring rain when my hands were shaking too much to try. I revoked the power of attorney, signed it all myself, in blue ink. That night, I packed 2 bags and left a note. Said I needed air. Didn't say where. I didn't owe them more than that. I left my keys on the table. But I took the deed. It took them 3 days to realize I was gone. I saw the posts. Does anyone know where Evelyn is? My son's voice was tight when he left the first voicemail. Just wanted to check in. Mom, let us know you're okay. Then Meredith, we're really worried. Are you safe? Then louder ones, accusing tones wrapped in fake concern. It's really selfish, Mom. Caleb's face looked drawn in the picture. He posted missing our matriarch. I didn't respond. But I watched them come undone. I heard Meredith's voice cracking in the background of a call I didn't pick up, saying she didn't know what was real anymore, that they couldn't touch anything in the house without my permission. I had moved into a small motel by the coast. Nothing fancy, just peace and peeling wallpaper. The sea hummed behind the curtains. Every morning I walked to the corner cafe. The woman at the counter learned my name. Evelyn with the tea and lemon. She smiled with her eyes. I started writing again, little poems. Grocery lists that ended in please take care. One afternoon, a boy named Mateo helped carry my groceries. Said he lived nearby. Reminded me of Caleb, but softer. He asked if I wanted help installing the new lamp I bought. I said yes. He didn't take anything, just stayed until the light worked, then left. It felt like starting over. It's with less, but lighter. 3 months later, a letter came. Caleb's handwriting, not Meredith's. He said he was sorry, that he didn't know how much he'd let slip away, that he'd understand if I never responded. I stared at the paper for a long time. I didn't cry, pressed my palm to it, like a mother checking for fever. Then I slid it into the drawer. With the others, he came once, showed up outside the motel, didn't come in, just waited. I opened the door but didn't step out. He looked older, small. Said, I miss you, Mom. Said, I'm sorry we made you feel like you didn't matter. I said, you didn't make me feel anything. You just showed me. He nodded. Didn't argue. I said, take care of yourself. Then I closed the door. Now the mornings are slower. I walk with bare feet. I don't look at the clock as much. Keep a small frame by my bed. Doesn't hold family. It holds a picture of the ocean taken the day I arrived. The sky was gray, the water endless. I wrote a word in the sand that day, peace. Sometimes the waves erase it. But I always write it again. This time I decide who gets to call me anything. Else they used to call me Sunshine. Back when I wore my hair short and kept a peppermint in every pocket. Back when Caleb would come home from school, drop his backpack at the door and say, "What's for dinner, Mama?" Like I was the one thing that stayed steady in a world too big for him to name. I remember those years with a softness that hurts. The mornings smelled like oatmeal and the television played too loud, and I didn't care. I had someone who needed me. I mattered. That was all I ever really wanted. It's strange the way mothers disappear. Not all at once, not in some grand moment with shouting or slammed doors. It happens slowly, almost politely, like fog. One day, you're helping them tie their shoes. Then you're writing checks for college. Then you're told not to worry, we've got it handled. And by then, the word we doesn't include you anymore. Caleb was my only. I raised him on my own after his father left. Left is a soft word for it, but I've softened with age. He died. Last year, though, I hadn't seen him in 2 decades. That grief was strange, like grieving a shadow that once frightened you, even though it hadn't touched you in years. I used to worry that being a single mother would break Caleb, that he'd grow up with a hole where a father should be. But he didn't. He was kind, smart, sensitive even. I remember the time he got a bloody nose in 3rd grade. And he cried not for himself, but because he'd ruined his shirt, and he knew I worked hard to keep his clothes clean. He apologized through tears. I held him close and whispered, "It's just fabric, sweetheart. Not you." He was never spoiled, but I gave him everything I had. Time, mostly. Energy I didn't always have to spare. There were nights I came home from shelving books at the library with my back aching, and he'd be waiting with a picture he drew or a story about what happened at recess. I never missed one. I made myself a place in his world, gently, always, gently. But the truth is, we don't raise them to stay. We raise them to leave. And then we're surprised when they do. I met Meredith at a Christmas dinner I hosted. I had made roast chicken and herbed potatoes. The table was set with the good china. The one I only brought out for holidays or for Caleb's return from college. She was beautiful. Too beautiful. You know the type. Everything about her looked like it had been curated for someone else's gaze. She smiled too wide, held her wine glass too delicately. I told myself not to be unfair. Don't be the bitter mother-in-law. She laughed at everything. Caleb said that night. Laughed like she'd been coached to. When I asked about her family, her eyes flicked sideways. She said they were complicated. I understood that. I respected it. That was the first mistake. I mistook her distance for depth. They married quickly. I wasn't asked to help plan the wedding. Sat near the back, alone. Caleb gave me a corsage, the kind you'd pin on a substitute teacher. I smiled, took pictures, clapped when they danced. I remember Meredith looking right past me, like she was already editing me out of the photographs. After the wedding, things began to shift. Subtly, the kind of changes you feel before you can name them. Holidays were suddenly full. Tane. No room at the table, Mom. They had friends coming. Could I bring dessert instead? They loved my peach cobbler. But could I just drop it off? They were doing a couples theme. I nodded. I smiled. I brought the cobbler. I left before it cooled, and slowly I became a guest in their world. A helper, a stand-in. The one who watered their plants when they traveled. The one who sat with the kids when they needed a weekend away. I told myself it was love, that I was still needed. Still seen. But it was only when I was completely quiet that I began to hear what they really thought. There was a birthday dinner once. Mine? I hadn't asked for much. Just a few hours with them. They were late. The children were restless. Meredith made a comment under her breath about how old people always want to be celebrated for surviving another year. Caleb didn't hear it, or pretended not to. I laughed, quietly, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep a place in a house you no longer own. Later that night, I sat in the living room alone while they tucked the children into bed. I looked around at the pictures on the wall, every one of them full of lights, smiles, beaches, family trips. I wasn't in any of them. That was the second time I knew. The first time was when Meredith said the words at the table. But that night, looking at the walls, I realized it had been decided long before, that I had been slowly, skillfully removed. Not cruelly, just ... deliberately. I think that's what hurt most. The deliberateness. I started writing things down after that. Little notes, where I'd stored my pension documents. What account held the house deed? Not because I planned to leave, but because I needed to remind myself that these things belonged to me, that my life wasn't just an appendix in theirs. There's a kind of grief that comes not from being left, but from being slowly erased while standing right there, still breathing, still offering soup and rides and small envelopes on Christmas, still calling even when the line stays cold. And still, I stayed. Because part of me hoped quietly, pathetically, that someone would say, "Thank you." But no one did. And eventually, the part of me that waited grew very, very tired. I never meant to find it. That's the part that circles back sometimes, late. At night, like a loose thread, I keep pulling. Wasn't looking for proof. Already felt it in the way they paused before saying my name, if they said it at all. In how Meredith stopped hugging me at the door, and how Caleb started using words like boundaries and space when I asked if I could keep the spare key. But proof has its own kind of violence. I had gone into the office to look for an old insurance document, just something I needed to update my address at the pharmacy. The filing cabinet wasn't locked. It had always been, but this time it wasn't. Maybe that was the first sign that they didn't think I needed locking out anymore. I opened the drawer and saw the folders, labeled in Meredith's handwriting. Crisp, straight lines. Neater than mine. I found what I needed and was just about to close it again when I saw the tab labeled Evelyn. I stared at it. Touched the corner with my finger. It wasn't thick, just a handful of papers. Maybe I should have left it alone. But there's something about seeing your name in someone else's system. It makes you wonder what version of you they've filed away. I opened it. The first page was a power of attorney form. My name typed across the top with Caleb's name, listed as agent. I blinked. I had never signed this. But there it was, a signature that looked like mine, but not quite. Tilted too far to the right. A little rushed at the tail of the Y, the way someone writes when they're copying, not remembering. There was a letter attached from a lawyer I didn't know. Language about capacity, about best interest, about how the document had been signed, and filed due to concerns over my ability to manage certain affairs. It was dated 6 months ago. 6 months. That was when they stopped asking me to pay for groceries. When Meredith told me she'd already handled the taxes this year. When I noticed a different tone in Caleb's voice, less like a son, more like a manager. Beneath it, I found the revised will. It had been prepared under my name. Every line rewritten. The home no longer listed as part of my estate. Counts? Consolidated? Beneficiaries? Reassigned. I'd been removed as executor. Caleb was listed as sole beneficiary. Meredith had signed as a witness. Again, a signature was there. Crooked, I felt cold behind the knees. There was a note attached to Meredith again. A sticky square with her looping script. Just remove her from the top. She won't contest. Already? Thinks we're taking care of her. I remember reading that line 3 times. Each time it felt thinner, meaner, more certain. I placed the papers back in the folder, gently, like something that could still explode. I closed the drawer, walked out of the office, and sat in the living room where the light was soft and no one would look for me. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, like a guest waiting to be excused. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because the sadness wasn't sharp. It was thick. Like fog wrapped around the bones, they had made a plan. Not for my care, but for my absence. That was the part that made my hands shake. They weren't worried about me. They weren't planning with me. They were planning past me. They had already decided I was no longer mine, that I belonged to the version of me they could manage, quiet, grateful, out of the way. After dinner that night, Meredith complimented my sweater, said it looked cozy. Caleb asked if I wanted to watch something. I nodded, said maybe later. Voice sounded like someone else's, soft, apologetic. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay there with the ceiling staring down at me. I thought about how easily we become invisible. Not all at once, bit by bit. First, they stop asking what you want for dinner. Then, they forget your stories. Then, they sign your name without asking. And somehow, you're still the one who feels like a burden. I thought about that signature, Crooked Evelyn. The imposter version of me, they preferred one who didn't ask questions. Didn't look too closely, didn't have a voice. And I thought, no, not this way. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I made coffee, folded laundry, played the role I had been assigned one last time. I needed to be careful, to be smart. You can't reclaim what's yours by shouting. You do it with stillness. With certainty, that evening, Meredith left her laptop open. I glanced at it just long enough to see the tabs. Real estate consultations, long-term care options. Something about property valuation. I closed the screen. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being replaced. I walked upstairs and opened the old storage box at the back of my closet. Inside was the original will I had drafted 5 years ago. The one that had my signature, real and steady. The one that left everything to Caleb because I had believed in us. I had trusted love to mean enough. I opened my notebook and wrote down everything. Dates, names, what I saw, but I hadn't signed. I made a list of steps. Call the county clerk, check account logins, print statements, change passwords. I wasn't planning a fight. I was preparing a departure, because when someone tells you, with their actions, that your worth has expired, you don't stay to argue. You don't try to change their minds. You reclaim the parts of yourself they thought they could rewrite, and you leave. Quietly, carefully, completely. I think I stopped answering to my name before I even realized it. It was subtle. Meredith would call me her when talking to the kids. Caleb would say, Mom, with that worn-out kindness people use at nursing homes. But the word Evelyn, it didn't get used much anymore. Not in this house. Not in their plans. It lived in my old mail and the tags on gifts they forgot to wrap. I missed hearing it. The sound of someone saying it because they saw me, not because they needed something from me. That morning, after I'd found the papers, I sat in the backyard with my notebook and a plastic pen that skipped when I pressed too hard. I wrote my name over and over again. Evelyn, Evelyn Moore. It felt like stitching something back together. Slowly, there's something strange about the moment. You decide you're done being small. Doesn't feel loud or heroic. Feels like closing a drawer softly, like locking a door behind you and realizing you don't need to reopen it. I started waking up earlier before anyone else. The house was quiet then, still pretending to be kind. I made my tea and sat with my lists, bank accounts, password changes, safety deposit box. I began gathering the original documents, the will, the deed, my social security card. I'd kept them tucked inside a linen envelope in the back of the bookshelf, behind a row of mystery novels no one ever touched. I made photocopies, scanned them into a USB drive I wore on a chain around my neck. Meredith thought it was a necklace. She once complimented it. I said thank you and smiled. There's a different kind of power that comes from being underestimated. When people think you're fragile, they don't watch their backs. They assume you've forgotten how the world works. They forget that you were once the one who taught them how to tie their shoes, how to boil an egg, how to read the fine print. I hadn't forgotten a thing. I called the county office one afternoon and asked what I'd need to revoke a fraudulent power of attorney. The woman on the phone spoke gently, like I might be confused. A letter. At the end, she said, "You sound clear." I said, "I am. Next." I called my bank, asked to remove the names Caleb had added. They asked if I had legal documentation. I said yes. I brought it in that same afternoon, wore my blue sweater and combed my hair. Signed everything with my real hand. Watched them stamp the forms with that heavy, permanent sound. It felt like breathing again. Back at the house, things went on as usual. Meredith had no idea. Caleb either. I kept making dinner, kept folding the kids' pajamas, kept my voice low. It was easier that way. They still thought I was withering. I wasn't. I was blooming in secret. There was a small moment that almost broke me. It was one of the children, Sophie, the oldest. She came into my room while I was filing away some papers. She asked if she could sit on my bed. I said, of course. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, quietly, she said, "Mommy says you're old now and that it's our turn to take care of things." I nodded, said that's nice of her. But inside, I felt the splinter deepen. Even the smallest ones were being trained to see me as fading. Someone gently being ushered off stage. That night, I wrote a letter to myself. Not the kind with flowery language. Just a list, things I still am. A woman who remembers everything. A mother who gave her entire life. The owner of this house. The writer of the first will. The person whose name is really tucked it under my pillow. The next day, I checked into a storage unit, paid 3 months in advance. Began moving small things there. Photographs, birth certificates, the tea set my mother gave me, my journals, the books Caleb had written in as a child. I didn't want them touched when I left. I didn't want to leave pieces of myself behind, just so they could be boxed up and forgotten. I also filed for a P.O. box, a new one, just mine, out of town. I gave no forwarding address. At night, I practiced walking out in my head. It's what I'd take. It's what I'd say. Eventually, the answer was nothing, and I wouldn't say a word. One evening, I stood in the kitchen while Meredith and Caleb argued quietly in the living room. Something about money. I didn't listen closely. I was stirring soup. And I remember thinking they really believe I'm theirs to manage. But I wasn't. And they would find that out soon enough. That was the same night I placed the envelope in my purse. The one with the new will. Not the forged one. Mine. The final version. The one I would file the next morning after I slipped out quietly. They would wake up to find the eggs already boiled, the coffee warm in the pot, and my room empty. That would be the last favor I gave them. And maybe they'd search for an answer. Maybe they'd call the neighbors or post online. But by then, I would be gone. Not missing, just elsewhere. With everything that mattered folded neatly in a bag beside. Me and the name Evelyn Moore stitched into every page of the life I was reclaiming. The morning I left, the sky was the color of dishwater. Pale and unremarkable. It felt right. No drama. No last-minute revelations. It's just a soft gray morning. I boiled the eggs like I always did. Toasted the bread, though I didn't butter it. Meredith always liked to control that part herself. Caleb liked his coffee, half cream. I left the container on the counter, lid off so he'd know I'd been there. Upstairs, the children were still asleep. I listened to their breathing through the floorboards. That was the only part that made my throat tighten. But even that passed. I had already said goodbye to them in my heart days ago. I wiped the counters, folded the kitchen towel, and laid my keys beside the fruit bowl. Then I slipped out, no door slam, no suitcase rolling over the floor. I had packed light 2 canvas bags, zipped and tucked in the back of the car. One held clothes, the other, everything else, the deed, the notarized will, the power of attorney I had revoked. My Social Security card, 3 notebooks full of every detail they thought I hadn't noticed. I left behind the furniture. The framed photos on the hallway wall. The decorative pillows Meredith insisted made the house presentable. They could have the presentation. I was taking the proof. I drove without music. Just the hum of the tires and the sound of my own breath. I didn't feel free yet. Freedom, I knew, would come slowly. I stopped at the county records office first. Filed the updated documents. The clerk didn't ask questions, just scanned and stamped. I kept waiting for her to look up and ask me if I was sure. But she didn't. Maybe I looked certain. Maybe 73 years of being ignored had finally etched something decisive in my face. Next was the post office. My new P.O. box. I slid the key onto my keyring like it was a wedding band. Small symbol. I stood there for a minute after, just looking at the little silver door. My name behind it? Mine again. Then I drove to the motel. It wasn't glamorous. The paint peeled at the corners and the bathroom light flickered if you breathed too hard. But the bed was clean, the clerk was kind, and no one knew I was there. I liked it immediately. I unpacked only the essentials, set my tea bags beside the little microwave, laid my nightgown across the edge of the bed, hung the only photo I brought. Old one of me, taken at 28, holding Caleb on my hip, both of us squinting into the sun. I pinned it to the corkboard with a rusted thumbtack the last tenant must have left behind. I didn't cry. I made tea. I sat on the bed and crossed my ankles. That afternoon, I walked to the library. Smaller than the one I used to work in, but familiar. I returned the book I'd checked out under my old address quiet, The Power of Introverts, and borrowed something new, something that had nothing to do with motherhood, back at the motel. Started a new list. Things I have now. My name, my words, my proof, my space. It was quiet. But it was mine. A week passed before I heard the first voicemail. Caleb's voice. Tight. Mom. Hey. Just wanted to see where you were. Meredith thought maybe you went to see Aunt Denise, but she hasn't heard from you. Can you call me, please? IDN, single quotes. 2 days later, another one. Okay, we're kind of worried now. This is about something we said door, something Meredith said you. Could have talked to me. I listened once, then I deleted it. I wasn't punishing them. That's what people don't understand. This wasn't revenge. This was retrieval. I was taking myself back. On the 5th day, I opened the group chat we used to share. Birthday reminders, grocery lists, photos of the children's art projects. I left the group, no explanation. Just gone. I expected Meredith to write me privately. She didn't. Maybe she knew it wouldn't make a difference. Or maybe she didn't care enough to try. Caleb kept sending messages. Few were gentle. Then they got sharp. He said I was being dramatic. I was hurting the kids. that I was ruining our family. That one made me laugh, soft and bitter. Ruining our family as if it hadn't already been emptied of me. As if I hadn't been standing in the hallway with a smile while they erased my name off paperwork and gave me a seat at the far end of the table. I turned off my phone for 2 days after that. Let the silence settle. It felt like clean sheets. Eventually, I bought a second-hand laptop. Logged into my accounts, updated every address, made backups, deleted old permissions. I watched the list shrink. Meredith's name, Caleb's access. Gone. There was a pleasure in the clicking, a rhythm. My fingers remembered how to do things no one thought I still knew how to do. I wrote a new will. I printed it, signed it with a pen I chose for myself, one with deep blue. Ink that didn't smudge. This one didn't leave anything to Caleb. It named the library, the food bank. And Mateo, the young man who helped me with my groceries last week and didn't ask for anything in return. He told me his grandmother had raised him. That she died when he was 19. He still keeps her handwriting in his wallet, I told him. I liked that he asked if I wanted help carrying my bag. Said yes. That was the first time I let someone new into my life. Not because I was lonely, but because I could choose. And that, I think, was the moment I felt free. Not when I changed the will, not when I walked out, but when I realized I didn't owe anyone access to my days anymore. Not even the ones I gave my whole life to. They didn't notice I was gone right away. That much was clear. The first few days after I left, they probably thought I'd gone for a walk or to visit someone. They didn't expect silence. They were used to me folding myself back in like a tablecloth, always there when needed, tucked away when not. But by the 5th day, something shifted. I heard it. In Caleb's voice the second time he called. The lightness was gone. He didn't ask if I was all right. He asked if I was doing this on purpose, as if my absence were a punishment instead of a choice. Meredith left a message too. Just one. She didn't call me Mom. She called me Evelyn. Evelyn. We just want to understand what you're doing. Not where are you, not are you safe, not we're sorry. Just what are you doing? They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what I'd taken with me. That was the week I checked the bank account again. Caleb's name was no longer listed. It's just mine. I imagined him sitting at his laptop, refreshing the login page, confused. Meredith calling customer service. Her voice saccharine until it snapped. I watched from a safe distance. There was a strange, cruel comfort in knowing they had underestimated me so completely, that they hadn't even considered the possibility that I would leave, not dramatically. Not in anger, but with quiet, lawful precision. I kept the phone turned off for a while. Let the world knock at a door that no longer had a keyhole. When I turned it back on, the messages had changed. Now they were frantic. You emptied the accounts. Are you serious, Mom? We were counting on those funds. The house title is, this a mistake? We need to talk. This isn't how families handle things. I didn't respond. I didn't block them either. I wanted to see the unraveling. Not out of cruelty, but because for once, it was them who were scrambling. For once. I wasn't the one shrinking myself down so they could stretch out. Can call it comfort. The voicemail that finally made me pause came late on a Sunday evening. Caleb's voice was smaller. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know you felt this way. I guess I thought, I don't know what I thought. Please just call me. We miss you. He didn't sound like a man managing a situation anymore. He sounded like a son. But even that didn't move me to respond, because I knew the difference now. Between missing someone and missing their usefulness, I spent that week watching the chaos from the stillness of my new room. Motel wallpaper curling at the edges. Coffee from the corner cafe. A small window that let the afternoon sun fall across my feet like a blessing. One morning, a friend from the library sent me a message. Not someone close, just an old coworker who still followed me online. She wrote, saw Kayla post something. Strange. Everything okay? He said you're taking time away from the family and that they're trying to respect your space. I laughed softly when I read it, taking time away. Like I'd gone to a spa. They couldn't say the truth out loud, not even to the internet, because to say it would mean admitting they pushed too far. That they forged my name. That they assigned themselves the title of caretakers while plotting how to empty me out. Instead, they made it sound like I was overwhelmed, or tired, or confused. Maybe that was the part that stung more than anything else. Even in my absence, they needed me to be small, but I wasn't small anymore. I was quiet. There's a difference. A quiet woman with folders, notarized forms, new passwords, and a memory sharp as glass. They kept calling for weeks. The tone kept shifting, first frantic, then apologetic, then irritated again. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You're hurting people who love you. What happened to the mother I knew? That last one? That's the one I played twice because I wanted to hear how strange it sounded out loud. What happened to the mother? I knew she got tired of disappearing. That's what happened. She realized that love without respect is just obligation with a smile on top. The voicemail inbox filled. Then Caleb tried a new number. I let it ring. I wasn't afraid. I had nothing to fear anymore. I had filed everything in my own name. Rerouted mail, closed the old accounts. The house now legally rested under the trust I named after my mother, a woman who raised me to survive. The panic continued. A message from Meredith's sister. We don't know where you went, but you're scaring people. Please come back. I hadn't known they cared enough to involve anyone. Maybe that was Meredith's way of trying to shift the narrative. Make it sound like concern. Make it look like a rescue mission. But I didn't need rescuing. I was already saved by myself. And if they were scared now, it wasn't because I was missing. It was because they were missing the control, missing the money, missing the version of me who said yes with a smile even when it hurt. I received one letter, real paper, a return address. The envelope was thick. It was from Caleb. 6 pages. His handwriting uneven. Said he never meant to hurt me. That Meredith had handled most of the paperwork. That he hadn't read it closely. That he thought I was happy. He told me he was sorry. That he didn't understand what it felt like to be made small inside your own life. He asked if I would come home. He said they'd fix it. I folded the letter and placed it in a shoebox with the others. I didn't reply because home isn't where you're asked to disappear. It's where you are allowed to stay whole. The first morning I woke up and didn't reach for my phone. I knew something had shifted. It was still early, the light just beginning to stretch across the faded curtains. I listened to the sound of footsteps from the room above, some traveler making their way toward a day that wasn't mine to carry. The motel was quiet except for that and the birds. There were always birds, even here. I made tea on the small burner by the window, sat in the little chair with the wicker arms that creaked when I leaned back. No one was waiting on me to cook. No one had left dishes in the sink. There was no laundry calling my name, just me, cup of Earl Grey, and the sky, still undecided about whether it wanted to be blue or gray. It was enough. In the beginning, I kept track of the days, but eventually I stopped marking time. The point wasn't to count how long I'd been gone. The point was that I wasn't measuring myself against their calendar anymore. I made a rhythm of things, small, manageable tasks. I'd walk to the cafe in the mornings, order one scone, half-wrapped, and eat it slowly on the bench near the dog park, even though I didn't have a dog. I'd nod to the regulars. The man with the cane, the young couple with the baby that never cried, the college student who sat cross-legged with headphones the size of her face. They didn't know who I had been. They didn't ask. And that was part of the freedom. One afternoon, I stopped by the town library. It was quiet, always a good sign. I asked the woman behind the desk if they needed volunteers. I guess she looked surprised. Said they did, especially someone who knew how to alphabetize. I smiled. Said I used to shelve books for a living. She handed me a form, asked for a phone number, gave her my new one. It felt like a ceremony, Small re-entry into a world I didn't have to perform for. The library was old but clean. The carpets smelled like dust and hope. I came in on Mondays and Thursdays, filed things, helped little kids find dinosaur books, pointed out where the biographies lived. No one asked who I was, just what time I could come back. It gave me purpose. It's not the kind that's demanded. It's the kind that's chosen. There was a boy, there may be 10 or 11, who came in with his grandmother. His name was Micah. His coat was always zipped up too high, his eyes a little too wary for a child. He reminded me of Caleb long before ambition had turned him cold. Micah used to hover near me while I shelved books. One day I asked if he wanted to help. He nodded without saying anything and started sorting by color. I didn't correct him. We just made a rainbow of fiction and called it art. His grandmother watched us from the bench near the encyclopedias. She didn't interrupt. She gave me a smile when they left that day. A kind smile. The kind women give one another when they know something about pain but don't need to say it. I started looking forward to Micah's visits. And to hers. We didn't talk much, just small exchanges. But once, she placed a hand on mine and said, "You're very patient with him." I told her I had practice. She didn't ask from where. And I didn't offer. Eventually, I moved out of the motel. Found a one-bedroom apartment behind a hardware store. The carpet was terrible, but the light was soft in the afternoons. I bought my own dishes, 1 plate, 1 cup. It's 2 forks, just in case. I planted herbs on the windowsill, basil, thyme, mint. I watered them carefully. I named them. It's because, why not? I named the mint Margaret. She thrived. I didn't talk about the past. Not to the librarian. Not to the cashier at the grocery store. Not to the woman at the DMV who asked for my old address, and I simply said, "I don't live there anymore," and that was enough. Because sometimes the telling makes it real again. And I had no interest in stitching those old wounds back open just to hear them echo. I wrote in the evenings, not letters to them, letters to myself. I wrote about the sound of spoons. It's the weight of silence when it isn't loaded with expectation. It's the feeling of eating soup alone and not needing to fill the space with anything but your own company, I wrote. About forgiveness, not for them. For me. Forgiving myself for waiting so long to leave. For staying past the point where love had gone quiet. For believing that silence meant peace, when really it meant dismissal. One Sunday morning I received a postcard. It was from Micah's grandmother. It said simply, "Thank you." He smiled more this week. It's strange the ways people hold each other without even meaning to. A hand steadying a stranger. A quiet nod in a library. A seat shared on a bench in the sun. I started saying my name out loud again. Evelyn. I'd whisper it while brushing my hair. Evelyn, not Mom, not her. Not the help, Evelyn. The woman who walked away. The woman who lived. The woman who found a new rhythm under the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper and time. One who mattered. Even if no one said it. Especially because no one needed to anymore. It had been nearly 4 months when I saw him again. I had just stepped out of the market. A cloth bag slung over my shoulder with a carton of milk, some pears, and a loaf of bread still warm at the bottom. The sun was sharp that day. One of those winter mornings that pretend to be spring. I squinted across the parking lot, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow I recognized. It was him, Caleb, standing beside a silver car that didn't suit him. Probably a rental. He looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was finally seeing him without the weight of all the expectations I used to carry for him. I didn't stop walking. He saw me, called my name. Not Mom, not Evelyn. It's just the way someone calls into a hallway when they're not sure the door will open. I paused, near the edge of the lot, not because I was afraid, just because I needed a breath before letting that past breathe my air again. He jogged over. His hair was longer, unkempt in a way he wouldn't have allowed before. His hands were trembling, though he tried to hide. it by sliding them into his coat pockets. He said he had been trying to find me, that they were worried, that he'd been to the old house, spoken to neighbors, even driven out to Denise's place. I said nothing. I waited. Then he said it. It's what he really came for. We didn't mean to hurt you. A familiar sentence. It's worn out from overuse in my lifetime. I let the words hang there between us, soft and useless. I told him I wasn't hurt. I said, I'm not broken. Caleb, I left because I meant to. He looked down the way he used to as a child when he'd gotten caught in a lie he told himself first. He started to explain. Meredith handled the paperwork. He thought it was just a precaution. He didn't read everything. He didn't question it. He said he thought I'd want them to manage things. That word again, manage, I said. You mean control? He flinched, but he didn't deny it. He said he missed me, that the kids missed me, that Sophie had started asking where I was, and they didn't know what to tell her. I nodded. I said, tell her I took my name back. He asked if I'd come home. I told him gently. I am home. He tried to explain again, as if more words might fix the thing he still couldn't name. But the truth wasn't hidden behind paperwork anymore. The truth was this. I had been removed, and I had responded not with rage, but with retreat. Not because I was afraid, but because I had nothing left to prove. He said Meredith was sorry too. I said, I don't need her apology. He looked at me like that was the cruelest thing I'd ever said. But it wasn't cruel. It was simply true. There are some wounds that don't ask for bandages. They ask to be left alone so they can heal in their own shape. He asked if we could sit somewhere. Just talk. I looked at the bread warming the side of my bag, the milk sweating through the paper. I said, I have things to get home to. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He just stood there as I turned. I could feel him watching me walk away. The way someone watches a door they forgot to hold open. Back at my apartment, I set the bread on the counter and poured a glass of water. My hands weren't shaking. My breath was steady. There was no triumph in what had happened. No victory. Just stillness. Just peace. That evening, I sat by the window and thought about what it means to forgive someone quietly without needing them to know. To forgive because it frees you, not because it frees them. I forgave Caleb in that parking lot, not out loud. Not in any way he'd recognize, but I let go of the hope that he'd ever fully understand. That was enough. I didn't block his number. I didn't send him away with harsh words. I let him speak. I let him see me, not as someone he had to care for, but as someone he no longer had the right to decide for it. That night, I lit a candle. No special reason, just to mark the space. A small glow in the stillness. I ate a piece of bread with butter, drank warm tea, wrote down what I remembered from the parking lot, how his eyes didn't meet mine until stayed quiet long enough for the noise in his head to settle, how the apology didn't come in the words he said, but in the way his shoulders dropped when he realized I didn't owe him anything anymore, how I didn't feel empty when he left. I felt full, and that was the final sign. I didn't need to return to anything. I hadn't run away. I had arrived. I don't know if there's ever a final moment when you know you've healed. It doesn't happen like they say. Not all at once. There's no trumpet or sunrise or great sweeping gesture. Smaller than that. It's folding the laundry without your hands shaking. It's hearing your name and recognizing it again. Not as an obligation, but as your own. It's eating a meal you cooked for no one but yourself and tasting every bite. I've stopped checking my phone for their messages. Not out of anger, just because the silence no longer frightens me. For so long, I mistook noise for love, the birthday calls, the group chats, the clinking of silverware in houses where I was served last. But quiet isn't always absence. Sometimes it's dignity, and I have grown fond of dignity. I walk each morning down a little path behind my building that winds near the canal. It isn't much, just a strip of water with reeds and the occasional duck, but it's mine now, If I know the pace of the joggers who pass, if I know which tree blooms first and which one loses its leaves without sound. I sit on a bench that has no plaque and no history. I bring a thermos and a notebook. I write small things. Not about them. Not anymore. I write what I see. I write what I remember that still makes me smile. I write my name at the top of each page. Just Evelyn. There's something about writing it now with no eyes watching. No expectations trailing behind it. I remember being a girl and practicing it on the inside of my books. Evelyn Moore. Evelyn L. Moore. ELMI. Write it the way I did back then, like it's the whole story. Sometimes I still get letters. Caleb sent a photo of Sophie drawing a picture of Grandma's teacup. He said she still talks about me. He didn't ask me to come back. Maybe he knows better now. Or maybe he's finally learned that asking doesn't entitle you to an answer. I placed the photo on my fridge. I didn't respond, because loving from afar is still love. Just doesn't cost you your name. I saw Meredith once more, at the library. I don't know why she came. Maybe curiosity. Maybe guilt. She stood at the edge of the fiction aisle, pretending. To read, I looked at her. She looked back. That was it. She didn't approach. She didn't speak, and neither did I. There was nothing left between us but the space I had carved out with silence, and I intended to keep it. This life, this slow, quiet, deliberate life is not the life I raised them to imagine. It doesn't have a house with shutters or a full table or laughter spilling across hardwood floors. But it has truth. It has stillness. It has my full self returned to me. I pay my bills, sweep my floor. I talk to the woman at the bakery who always remembers that I like the edge piece of the lemon bars. I wave to Micah and his grandmother when they walk by. He gave me a drawing last week, a house with a big sun and a crooked chimney. He said, "That's your new place. I can tell it's happier." He was right. The day I knew it for sure was a Tuesday. Nothing special. Just a warm breeze and the sound of church bells somewhere behind the trees. I opened all the windows, let the light fall. Across my feet, I didn't cry. I didn't think of what was lost. I just stood there, surrounded by nothing but what I had chosen. And I whispered, thank you, to no one, to everyone. To the woman I used to be who finally stood up, I wrote one final letter, folded it into an envelope, and tucked it into the back of my journal, not to send. Just to say, it read, "Dear Evelyn, you did not disappear. They tried, yes, but they forgot something. You remember who you are. And you're the only one who has to love me." I sealed it, labeled it in case I forget again. And then I walked down to the canal, sat on the bench, took the old photograph from my bag, the one from when Caleb was a baby, his little fingers curled around mine. I looked at it, held it close. Then I let it fall gently into the water, not to forget, just to release. Some memories belong to the past, some names do too, but not mine. Not anymore. This time I decide who gets to call me anything else.